I was 11 when my parents left for Europe, calling it a romantic reset, like I was old enough to understand what that meant. They pressed a wrinkled $20 bill into my hand and told me to be responsible, to not cause trouble, to act mature for my age. The door shut behind them, and the house felt bigger than it ever had before. Too big, too quiet. At first, I tried to treat it like an adventure, stretching noodles, counting coins, pretending the flickering lights didn't scare me. But by the second week, the fridge was empty, my calls went unanswered, and the silence felt heavier than hunger. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want them to look like bad parents, or me to look unwanted. What I didn't know was that someone had already noticed, and while they were laughing at a glittering party overseas, completely carefree, the first knock that would change everything had already happened. The music was loud, the lights were gold, and my parents were smiling for pictures when the doors opened, and the room slowly went quiet. At first, they thought it was just more guests arriving, maybe someone important, someone richer, someone worth impressing. But it wasn't. It was two uniformed officers walking calmly through the crowd, scanning faces until they found theirs. My mom laughed nervously, thinking it had to be a mistake. My dad tried to joke, lifting his glass like this was some kind of misunderstanding. It wasn't. "We need to speak with you," one officer said, voice steady, cutting straight through the music. They stepped aside, irritation turning into confusion. "Is this about a parking issue?" my dad asked, already annoyed. The officer didn't smile. "It's about your 11-year-old child." That was the moment the color drained from their faces. They tried to explain. They said I was independent. They said I was mature. They said I had money. $20, the officer repeated, not raising his voice, but somehow making it sound heavier than an accusation. Guests were staring now. Phones were lowering. Whispers started spreading like smoke. The officer continued calmly, listing facts they couldn't argue with. No supervision, utilities cut off, a minor left alone for weeks. My mom's hands began to shake. My dad's confidence cracked. "We were coming back," he insisted. "It was temporary." But temporary doesn't change empty cupboards. Temporary doesn't excuse silence. Temporary doesn't turn abandonment into parenting. Back home, I was sitting on a neighbor's couch wrapped in a blanket, answering gentle questions from a social worker who spoke to me like I mattered. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't cry dramatically. I just told the truth. And the truth was enough. Thousands of miles away, my parents realized something terrifying. This wasn't a private family matter anymore. This was official. Reports had been filed. Statements recorded. Investigations opened. The party music never turned back on. The laughter didn't recover. For the first time in their lives, they weren't controlling the narrative. They weren't the charming couple telling a romantic story. They were two adults explaining why their child had been sitting in the dark. My dad tried to lower his voice, to handle it quietly, but authority doesn't shrink to protect embarrassment. "You will need to return immediately," the officer said. Not a suggestion, not a request, a requirement. And in that moment, standing under crystal chandeliers with half their friends pretending not to listen, they finally understood something they had never considered before. They were not in control anymore. When they finally returned, it wasn't with excitement, gifts, or stories of European adventures. They came back with tense faces, quiet voices, and a sudden, unspoken awareness that everything had changed. The airport hugs they might have imagined didn't happen. There were no tears, no relieved laughter, no storytelling about sunsets or champagne. Instead, they were escorted into meetings where charm and excuses were useless, where adults spoke of neglect, supervision, and responsibility with clinical precision. I sat quietly, legs swinging above the floor, listening to words like abandonment, emergency contact failure, and child welfare as if they were abstract terms. But to me, each one was a night spent alone, Every unopened message, the $20 bill folded so many times it nearly tore, the hunger I had endured, the fear that had quietly nested in my chest. My parents tried to explain softly, saying I was mature, independent, and responsible, claiming their absence was only temporary, and that they trusted me. But reality doesn't bend to excuses. The empty fridge didn't care. The darkened rooms didn't care. The neighbor who had called for help didn't care. And the social worker who asked steady, careful questions didn't care. They were forced to confront facts they could no longer ignore. Back home, the house looked the same, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. My parents began checking whether I had eaten, verifying locks, remembering bills, and school schedules. Mundane things they had ignored before. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. I answered politely, completed my homework, kept my room clean, and acted as if nothing had changed. But internally, something had shifted irreversibly. I stopped striving to be the easy child, the one they could leave behind without consequence. That month alone had taught me vigilance, independence, and boundaries. My parents attempted to restore normalcy with family nights, snacks, careful questions, but fear of consequences and guilt do not rebuild trust. I now saw them differently, not as infallible protectors, but as humans capable of choosing themselves over me. I had learned that care is more than affection, that protection is a duty, not a favor, and that the absence of responsibility has consequences. That month had quietly redrawn the lines of our relationship. They thought leaving me alone would test my maturity. Instead, it revealed something they hadn't expected. I could survive, stand firm, and recognize the difference between authority that protects and authority that abandons. When the police walked into their European party, their world stopped, the music halted, laughter froze, conversations died midair. But for me, something quietly began: clarity, awareness, and an understanding of trust, boundaries, and self-reliance that could never be erased. They didn't lose me in a dramatic, cinematic way, but they lost the unquestioning faith I had once placed in them. That month left me older, wiser, and deeply aware that real care requires action. Protection cannot be assumed. And some lessons, learned in darkness and silence, leave marks that last a lifetime.